I'm really glad you're here tonight. This hour is different from the rest of the day. It doesn't ask you to decide anything. It doesn't ask you to perform or explain or keep up. It simply invites you to lie still and let your mind travel somewhere ancient and beautiful. Somewhere the wind carries salt from the ocean and the mountains breathe cool mist down into the valleys. Somewhere time moved differently. Somewhere people understood that the land, the sea, and the sky were not separate things, but one continuous conversation. As the years pass, nighttime becomes a kind of companion, a place where the mind is free to wander without interruption, where history returns, not as dates or facts, but as feeling, as texture, as the sound of wooden mallets on wet bark, as the smell of taro cooking slowly in an underground oven, as the sight of fish ponds shimmering in the long Hawaiian evening light. The mind does this most honestly when the lights are off and the world has gone silent. It reaches for the things that matter, the things that have always mattered, the deep patterns of human life lived in harmony with the earth. Tonight we travel to the Hawaiian Islands, not the Hawaii of airports and resorts and postcard sunsets, though those sunsets are real and they are extraordinary, but the Hawaii that existed long before any of that, the Hawaii of the Ahupua'a, the ancient land division system that organized an entire civilization from the top of the mountain to the bottom of the sea. A system so elegant, so complete, so deeply aligned with the rhythms of the natural world that it sustained hundreds of thousands of people for more than 1,000 years. So take a slow breath. Let your body soften into the bed. Let your shoulders release. Let your jaw unclench. Let your hands open. And allow this night to carry you across the water, across the centuries, to the islands where the land itself was a teacher. And now, before we begin, if this kind of honest, gentle reflection speaks to you, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. And down in the comments, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is where you are right now. There's something comforting about knowing we're all here together, scattered across time zones, but united in these late hours when the world finally grows still. So settle in, adjust your pillows, find a comfortable position, and know that for the next hour, you're not alone in whatever wisdom you're carrying, whatever understanding you've earned, whatever truths rise to the surface when the lights go out. Let's begin. You are lying in the darkness now. The weight of your blanket is familiar. The room around you is quiet. But somewhere beneath you, beneath the ordinary world, beneath everything you think you know about land and sea and sky, something older is waiting, something patient, something that has been holding its breath for 1,000 years, waiting for someone to lie still long enough to hear it. Close your eyes and let the islands come to you. You are standing at the edge of a mountain. Not any mountain you've climbed in your own life. This mountain rises from the center of a Hawaiian island, enormous and ancient, its peak lost somewhere in the clouds above you. The air up here is cool and thin and smells of wet stone and moss and something green and living that you don't have a name for. Mist moves through the trees in long, slow ribbons. The light is soft and diffused, the kind of light that exists nowhere except in high tropical forests where the clouds come down to meet the canopy. This is the uplands. This is where everything begins. Look down. Below you, the mountain drops in long sweeping ridges, like the fingers of an open hand reaching toward the sea. Between those ridges lie valleys, deep and lush and impossibly green, carved by rain and rivers over thousands of years of slow, patient geological conversation. And between those valleys and ridges and the ocean below, an entire world was organized. An entire civilization was built. An entire system of living was arranged so carefully, so thoughtfully, so completely, that every family from the mountain summit to the ocean reef had exactly what they needed to survive and to thrive. This is the Ahupua'a. The word itself is worth sitting with for a moment. Say it softly in your mind. Ahupua'a. It comes from two words. Ahu, meaning altar or heap, and pua'a, meaning pig. The Ahupua'a boundaries were marked by stone altars topped with a carved pig's head made from wood or lava rock placed at the edges of each land division so that anyone traveling through the island would know exactly where one community's territory ended and another began. These markers stood as the visible signs of a system that stretched from the mountain summit all the way down to the ocean reef, encompassing every environment, every ecosystem, every resource that a community of people would ever need. You don't have to hold on to any of this. You don't have to memorize it or analyze it. Let it simply wash over you the way warm water washes over tired feet at the end of a long day. Let it settle into you the way rain settles into the earth after a long dry season. Slowly, gratefully, without effort. The Ahupua'a was shaped like a wedge, narrow at the top, where the mountain peaks were cold and often wrapped in cloud, wide at the bottom, where the coastline spread out and the reef stretched into the turquoise sea. No two Ahupua'a were exactly the same size or shape. Some were a few miles across. Some were many miles wide. They followed the natural contours of the ridge lines, but all of them obeyed the same fundamental principle. All of them encompassed the full range of what the island could provide. Upland forest, middle valley farmland, coastal flatland, fish pond, ocean reef. Every family living within an Ahupua'a had access to all of these zones. A fisherman's family on the coast could trade dried fish for upland crops. A farming family in the valley could exchange taro for fresh ocean fish. A craftsperson in the middle lands could offer worked tools and finished cloth for food from above and below. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was hoarded for long. The system was designed so that everyone had enough, because everyone was connected to everyone else by the simple and unbreakable logic of geography. Breathe slowly now. Let your body sink deeper into the warmth beneath you. Let your breath find its gentle rhythm. Picture the mountain again, the very top of the Ahupua'a. Up here, the forest is dense and dripping with moisture. These are the Wao Akua, the realm of the gods, the deepest upland wilderness, where ordinary people did not go without purpose and careful spiritual preparation. The trees here are enormous. Oh, here Lehua trees with their brilliant red blossoms catching what little light filters through the cloud. Tree ferns rising 10 and 15 feet tall, their fronds unfurling in perfect slow spirals, ancient in their form, unchanged for millions of years. Mosses covering every stone and root and fallen trunk so thoroughly that the ground itself seems to be breathing. This forest was sacred, not merely in the abstract, spiritual sense, though it was certainly that. It was sacred in a deeply practical, irreplaceable sense. The trees here held the rain. The roots captured the water that fell from the clouds and released it slowly, steadily, into the streams that flowed down through the mountain. Without this forest, the streams would become unreliable. Without reliable streams, the taro fields in the valley below could not be flooded. Without the taro fields, the people would go hungry. The gods lived in this forest, and the gods, in the Hawaiian understanding, were not distant supernatural figures. They were the living forces that kept everything connected and alive. To dishonor the forest was to break the chain that fed your children. You've understood something like this in your own life. Not with forests necessarily, but with sources. The invisible foundations that support everything you can see. The relationships and disciplines and quiet commitments that hold everything else up. The things you've protected not because anyone told you to, but because some deep part of you recognized that if these particular things were damaged, something essential would unravel. The streams began up here in the Wao Akua. Small at first, barely more than thin ribbons of cold, clear water threading through the moss and lava rock. They gathered together as they moved downhill, joining and widening, picking up volume and steady momentum until by the time they reached the middle valley, they were substantial enough to be redirected, carefully managed, turned into something that still astonishes hydrologists and engineers who study these systems today. Come down the mountain now. Come down slowly, following the water. Notice how the air changes as you descend. It warms. It thickens with humidity and the fragrance of living things. The vegetation changes as the altitude drops. The wild upland ohia forest gives way to more open, cultivated ground. The sound of the stream grows more present, more intentional, as if the water itself understands where it is going. And then you see them, the lo'i Kalo, the taro paddies. They spread across the valley floor in terrace steps, each paddy holding a shallow layer of clean mountain water that flows from one level to the next in a system managed with extraordinary precision. The water moves constantly, but gently, never stagnant, always fresh, controlled by small earthen berms and precisely placed stone channels, built without any tools you would recognize from your own life. The engineers who designed these systems worked from intimate knowledge alone, knowledge of how water behaves on this particular slope, how the soil holds and releases moisture, how the roots of the taro plant breathe, how the whole living system needs to be arranged in order for everything to thrive together. You can hear the water now, that soft, continuous sound of water flowing over stone and earth. It is one of the oldest sounds in the world, long before cities, long before written language, long before almost anything you'd recognize from your modern life. Human beings were standing beside systems like this one, listening to that sound, knowing that the sound meant survival, meant abundance, meant that life would continue for another season. The taro plants stand in the shallow water of the Loi, their broad, deep green heart-shaped leaves catching the light with a kind of quiet authority. The corms grow slowly in the rich mud beneath the water's surface, invisible and patient, taking nearly a year to reach maturity. Kalo, the taro plant. In Hawaiian tradition, Kalo was not simply a food crop. It was family. The Hawaiian people understood themselves as being descended from Haloa, the elder brother, a stillborn child who had been placed in the earth and had grown up as the first taro plant, before the second Haloa was born as the first human ancestor. Every time someone planted taro, they were caring for their elder sibling. Every time someone harvested it and made it into food, they were participating in a relationship that reached back to the very beginning of the world. You've had relationships like that, not with plants perhaps, but with traditions, with practices that connect you to something larger than your individual life, the kind of repeated action that carries weight and meaning you couldn't fully explain to anyone who didn't already understand it in their own bones. Let that feeling settle into you now. The taro takes about a year to mature from planting to harvest. A full year of tending, flooding, watching, and waiting. The farmers who worked these paddies knew their plants individually. They knew which paddies drained fastest after a rain, which held warmth longest on cool nights, which produced the heaviest corms in a dry season. This knowledge had been accumulated across generations and was passed down with great care, the way all important knowledge was preserved in a culture without written language, through story, through demonstration, through the patient, daily teaching of one generation, watching and learning beside another. When the taro was finally harvested, it was transformed into poi through a process that was itself a kind of meditation. The harvested corms were cooked in an imu, an underground oven, where heated volcanic stones created steam heat that penetrated the dense starchy flesh slowly and thoroughly. Then the cooked taro was placed on a large, smooth wooden board and pounded with a heavy stone pestle until it became a completely smooth, elastic paste. Water was added gradually, the pounder working the mixture until the consistency reached exactly what the maker knew it should be. The result was poi, the absolute foundation of the Hawaiian diet, a food so complete in its nutrition that it formed the basis of nearly every meal eaten in the islands. Imagine that rhythm now, the steady rhythm of the pounder rising and falling, heavy stone lifted and released, the soft, dense sound of it meeting cooked taro on smooth wood, over and over, patient and unhurried, the person pounding not rushing towards some other task, not thinking about what comes next, simply doing this exact work at the pace this exact work required. This is a rhythm that quiets the mind, that dissolves urgency, that says with every repetition, this is the only thing that needs to happen right now. This motion, this moment, nothing else exists. Your breath is something like that. rising and falling at the pace it needs, without your direction, without your effort. It simply continues, the way the pounder continues, the way the water in the lowy channels continues. You don't have to manage it. You don't have to improve it. You only have to let it do what it already knows how to do. Below the taro fields, moving further down the slope toward the coast, the valley opens up and the cultivation changes. Here, the ali'i, the ruling class of Hawaiian society, maintained large gardens of sweet potato and breadfruit and yam. The breadfruit tree, called Ulu, was among the most generous and valued of all food plants in the Hawaiian world. A mature breadfruit tree could provide food for an entire family through months when other crops were difficult to grow. The large starchy fruits, roasted or fermented or pounded into paste, provided reliable sustenance through seasons of scarcity. People planted breadfruit trees as acts of love, as inheritance, as investment in a future they would never fully live to see. A tree planted today might feed your grandchildren or their grandchildren. This kind of long, patient relationship with time, this willingness to work for people not yet born, was woven into the entire structure of the Ahupua'a. You remember something about this kind of long thinking, the things you built or planted or protected, not for yourself, but for what would come after. The choices you made with a time horizon, larger than your own life. There is a particular generosity in that, a particular humility, an acknowledgement that the world does not begin or end with any single person. The middle zone of the Ahupua'a was also home to many of the community's craftspeople. And here, in these middle lands, where farmland met the more sheltered lower slopes, we find one of the most extraordinary and intimate of all Hawaiian traditions. The tradition of kapa. Kapa was Hawaiian bark cloth, made from the inner bark of several trees, most commonly the wauki, the paper mulberry. Kapa was the primary textile of the Hawaiian Islands. There was no wool, no cotton, no silk, no woven thread of any kind. Kapa was clothing. Kapa was bedding. Kapa was the material from which the most sacred ceremonial garments were constructed and from which the holiest objects were wrapped. It was made in enormous quantities, in astonishing variety of weight and texture and decoration, and the process of making it was long, physical, skilled, and deeply communal. You are lying under your own coverings right now. Whatever softness is resting against your skin was made by someone, somewhere, through some process. But in the modern world, the connection between your body and the hands that made what you rest in is invisible. In the Hawaiian world of the Ahupua'a, that connection was never invisible. You knew whose hands had beaten the kapa that covered your sleeping body. You knew which family's garden had grown the wauki the bark came from. The cloth that held you at night was not a product. It was a relationship, present against your skin every moment of rest. The kapa making process began with the wauka tree. Young shoots were selected carefully, harvested at the right time in the plant's growth, and stripped of their outer bark. The inner bark, pale and flexible, was soaked in fresh water until it softened further, until the individual fibers had relaxed and become receptive. Then came the beating. The kapa beater was a wooden mallet, typically carved from dense tropical hardwood with a rectangular striking head covered on each face, with precisely cut parallel grooves of varying widths and depths. When the softened bark was laid across a smooth stone or wooden anvil and struck with this beater, the grooves compressed and spread the fibers simultaneously, thinning the bark and widening it while also imprinting it with texture. The beating progressed methodically across the full length of the bark strip, then returned to the beginning and worked across it again from a perpendicular angle, creating a cross-hatched compression that gradually transformed the loose plant material into something with the cohesion and flexibility of true cloth. The sound of Kapa beating was the defining sound of Hawaiian civilization during the long centuries of the Ahupua'a. It rang through the valleys every morning as the households began their work. A rhythmic wooden percussion, hollow and resonant, carrying up the mountain slopes and down toward the sea, announcing that the community was alive and active and attending to its needs. When canoe travelers moved between Ahupua'a along the coast, or when messengers moved across the island on foot, the sound of Kapa beating told them which valleys were populated, which communities were at work, which households were well and functioning. Silence in a valley where work should have been happening meant something was wrong. Illness, perhaps, or the enforcement of kapu, the sacred prohibition that could stop all loud work during certain consecrated times. But we'll return to kapu in a moment. For now, stay with the sound. The steady, resonant, hollow sound of wood on wet bark on smooth stone. Think of it as a kind of heartbeat. Not one person's heartbeat, but a community heartbeat. The shared pulse of a society at work. Every morning, in every household where cloth was being made, this sound began, and the valley filled with it, layered and overlapping. A percussion section with no conductor, playing in loose natural synchrony because everyone knew the same rhythm and everyone kept it together without anyone telling them to. After the initial beating, the bark strips were layered together while still damp, the edges carefully overlapped to create sheets wider than any single strip could provide. The beating continued over the joined layers until the separate strips bonded into a single unified piece, felted by pressure and moisture into cloth that held its integrity. This process took several days for a large piece of kapa. Ceremonial pieces, 30 or 40 feet long, used to wrap the most sacred images of the gods, required weeks of work from groups of women together, their mallets rising and falling in shared rhythm, their conversation woven through the sound of the work. Once the basic cloth was formed and dried in the sun, decoration began. Hawaiian kapa was never plain. It was printed with intricate geometric patterns, using small stamps cut from bamboo, dipped in natural dyes derived from plants and minerals found within the Ahupua'a. The patterns were specific to families, to regions, to ritual purposes. A piece of kapa made for everyday sleep was different from a piece made for ceremony. A piece made to clothe a chief was different from a piece made for a farmer. The patterns carried information the way writing carries information, telling anyone who knew how to read them exactly who made this, where it came from, and what prayers had accompanied its making. You carry your own patterns in the same way, the habits of thought you return to without deciding to. the values so deeply embedded in your daily choices that you express them without noticing. The ways of moving through the world that identify you to people who know how to look. These patterns were given to you by your family, your culture, your long accumulation of experience, formed by repeated pressure over time, by the layering of one experience over another until the separate layers became inseparable, until you simply were the person all of that making had produced. Rest with that thought for a moment. You are the cloth of your own life, shaped and decorated by everything that has ever happened to you, particular in the way that only something genuinely handmade can be particular. The Kapu system is where the spiritual and practical dimensions of the Ahupua'a became fully visible as a single thing. Because in the Hawaiian world, these dimensions were never separate. There was no dividing line between the sacred and the practical. Every practical action was embedded in spiritual meaning. Every spiritual observance had practical consequence. The word kapu, from which the more widely known word taboo is eventually derived, meant sacred, forbidden, set apart by divine authority. Things designated as kapu were under divine protection from violation. To break kapu was not a personal failing or a social offense. It was a disruption of the cosmic order, an act that damaged the relationship between the human world and the divine forces that sustained it. And the consequences could extend beyond the individual who broke the prohibition. An entire Ahupua'a could suffer from one person's violation of kapu, because the divine order was not concerned with individual guilt. It was concerned with the integrity of the whole. The Kapu system organized the landscape. Certain places were kapu. The Wao Akua, the deep upland forest at the top of the Ahupua'a, was kapu to casual entry. The heiau, the sacred temple platforms of stacked lava stone that stood at significant points throughout the Ahupua'a, were kapu to all but the priests and the highest ali'i. Even certain stretches of ocean, certain fishing grounds during certain seasons, could be designated kapu, protected from harvest until fish populations had sufficiently recovered. The Kapu system organized time with equal precision. Certain days of the Hawaiian lunar calendar were kapu for specific activities. No fishing on certain sacred nights, no loud work, no beating of kapa, no running of water through new channels on the nights when the moon was in a particular phase. These time-based kapu gave the living world regular periods of rest and recovery that were built directly into the sacred law. Fish populations had time to replenish. Agricultural soil had time to rest between cycles. The people who observed the Kapu calendar were, whether they understood it in scientific terms or not, practicing what modern ecologists call sustainable resource management. They were giving the world time to breathe. The Kapu system organized behavior between people with equal care. Men and women ate separately in traditional Hawaiian practice. Certain foods were restricted to women at certain times. Commoners, walking in the presence of a high chief, were required to observe protocols that acknowledged the chief's sacred status. These social kapu structured the entire hierarchy of the Ahupua'a, from the ruling ali'i at the top through the konahiki, the land managers, to the maka'ainana, the common people who worked the land and maintained the order that allowed the system to function as a whole. This might seem unfamiliar to the modern ear, but there's something worth sitting quietly with tonight. The understanding that how you treat the land carries consequence beyond the moment. That how you treat the sea and the forest is not a private matter, but a shared one. That there are rhythms and obligations built into the nature of things that individual desire cannot always safely override. That the world functions best when people observe limits learned over generations of living closely with the consequences of crossing them. You've lived with your own version of this, the obligations you've honored even when inconvenient, the restraints you've maintained even when breaking them would have been easier, the things you've protected over time because you understood they were worth protecting. These are your own kapu, the sacred commitments that define the outer boundaries of who you are. The night is deep now. Your body is heavy and pleasantly warm. The mountain stands behind you. The taro paddies are still. The low channels carry water in their patient flow. The kapa beaters have been set aside for the evening, their rhythm dissolved into the silence that the valley welcomes at the end of each working day. And in that silence, you can hear what was always underneath the sound. The water, the wind in the breadfruit leaves, the distant, constant calling of the ocean from below, which is where we are going next. Down through the lower reaches of the Ahupua'a, where the valley opens and widens, and the soil becomes sandy and light, where coconut palms stand tall against a sky that is deepening now, from gold to purple, to the first pure dark of night, down toward the fish ponds that line the coast, those extraordinary engineered ecosystems that represented the Hawaiian genius for working with nature rather than against it, down toward the reef, down toward the edge of the known world, the place where the land surrenders to the sea and the entire Ahupua'a finds its completion. But that journey belongs to the second half of our night together. For now, rest here in the valley, in the middle world between mountain and sea, in the place where kapa was beaten into being and taro was pounded into sustenance, and the kapu held the sacred order of all things carefully in place. Let the rhythm of this ancient world move through you the way water moves through a stone channel, steady, purposeful, unhurried, going exactly where it is meant to go. You are held here, in this valley, in this night, in this understanding that has been waiting for a very long time for you to lie still enough and quiet enough to receive it. Breathe. The valley is green and deep around you. The stars are emerging now above the ridge, appearing one by one in the deep Hawaiian sky. In this world, before electric light, the stars were astonishing, enormous and clear. The Milky Way a blazing road arching from horizon to horizon. The Hawaiian people navigated their great canoes across thousands of miles of open ocean using only these stars, using the knowledge of their rising and setting, using the memory of ocean swells and the behavior of birds, using a form of intelligence so refined and accumulated across generations that it could not be reduced to any single lesson, but only to a lifetime of attentive, reverent learning. You look up at those stars now from your valley, and you feel something you perhaps haven't felt in a long time. The smallness that is also a kind of peace. The smallness of a single human life under an infinite and somehow perfectly organized sky. Not frightening smallness. The smallness of a single note in a symphony that could not exist without every note. Necessary. Specific. Part of something so large that the whole of it can never be heard from any single position within it. The Ahupua'a was like that. One note in the larger music of the island. One island in the larger music of the ocean. One ocean in the larger music of a world practicing this song for 4.5 billion years. And you, right now, in this moment, under these covers, breathing slowly in the generous dark, are one note in the music of everything that has ever rested and wondered and finally, gratefully, yielded to sleep. You belong here. You have always belonged here. In the valley, in the night, in the ancient, unhurried world that existed long before urgency was invented. Rest now. Let the valley hold you the way it has held everyone who has ever come to it, needing shelter and sustenance, and the particular mercy of a world that knew how to care for its own. The second half of our journey begins at the water's edge. When you are ready, we will walk together down to the coast, to the fish ponds that glitter in the evening light, to the reef that marks the outer boundary of the Ahupua'a, to the ocean that the Hawaiian people crossed and always found their way home across, guided by nothing except a lifetime of patient attention to the language of the world. For now, breathe. For now, rest. For now, let the green valley of the Ahupua'a receive you completely. You are safe here. You are warm here. You belong here, in this valley, in this night, in the long, quiet, beautiful conversation between the mountain and the sea. Come with me now. Down from the valley, down from the place where Kapa was beaten into being, and Taro grew slowly in its shining paddies, and the Kapu held the sacred order of everything carefully in its place. Down through the lower reaches of the Ahupua'a, where the valley begins to open and widen and breathe differently, where the soil lightens, becoming sandier, less dense, where the trees change again, becoming taller and more coastal, their roots accustomed to salt air and the rhythm of ocean weather. You are walking now, moving through the lower Ahupua'a in the quiet of a Hawaiian evening. The sun has made its long descent, and the sky above you holds the last colors of it. Gold deepening into amber, amber softening into rose, rose giving way to the first violet bruise of nightfall. The air is warmer down here near the coast. It carries salt. It carries the memory of fish and seaweed and the mineral richness of tidal zones where land and sea are always in conversation about where one ends and the other begins. Your feet are bare against the earth. Feel that. The warmth the ground has held from the day's geese radiating back through the soles of your feet. The subtle give of the soil as it transitions from the firm volcanic earth of the middle valley to the looser ground of the coastal flats. This is land that knows it is close to the ocean. Land that has absorbed generations of salt spray and storm surge. Land that is not quite land and not quite sea. but something in between. A threshold, a place belonging to both worlds at once. Breathe. The salt air fills your lungs. The Hawaiian people understood coastal zones as healing environments. The salt, the minerals, the quality of light reflecting off shallow, tropical water, the sounds of the reef, all were gifts from the sea. Forms of nourishment that fed parts of a person that taro and fish alone could not reach. And now, ahead of you, shimmering in the last of the evening light, you see them. The loko iha, the fish ponds. Stop for a moment and simply look. These are not natural features of the landscape. They are not accidents of geography or geology. They are engineering. Human intelligence made visible in stone and water and time. The Hawaiian fish pond is one of the great achievements of Pacific civilization, and you are looking at one now in the fading light of an ancient evening, and if you allow yourself to truly see it, it will take your breath away. The pond stretches before you, broad and shallow, its surface perfectly calm in the windless evening air. A long curved wall of stacked lava stone separates it from the ocean beyond, built without mortar, without machinery, standing against the Pacific for hundreds of years. The stones were selected individually, each fitted against its neighbors, with a precision born not from measurement, but from the accumulated wisdom of hands that worked with this volcanic rock across enough generations that the knowledge became instinct. In the wall, you can see the sluice gates. These wooden grating structures, called makaha, were positioned at intervals to allow water to flow between the pond and the ocean. Their grids were sized precisely to allow young juvenile fish, following the incoming tidal currents, to enter the pond from the sea, while preventing the same fish, once they had grown large, inside the pond's protected waters, from escaping back through the grates on the outgoing tide. Think about that for a moment, the simplicity of it, the elegance. Young fish swim in because the currents invite them and the grates allow passage. Old fish cannot swim out because they have grown too large for the same grates that admitted them. No nets required, no daily labor of capturing. The ocean does the sorting. Tidal physics does the work. The fish pond manager's primary task is simply to maintain the walls, keep the grates clear, and trust the system that generations of observation have built. This is the kind of intelligence that only emerges from living closely with a place for a very long time. Not book knowledge, intimate knowledge. The knowledge of someone who has watched fish behave in tidal conditions through every season of an entire life, and whose parents watched it before them. Knowledge accumulated so slowly and thoroughly that it stopped feeling like knowledge and began to feel simply like the nature of things. You've had your own version of this knowledge in your life. The deep expertise that no longer announces itself as expertise because it has become inseparable from who you are. The things you understand about your own domain, your own craft, that you couldn't fully explain to someone who hadn't lived what you've lived. Knowledge that doesn't live in your mind, but in your hands, your instincts, your capacity to read a situation and know without deliberating exactly what it needs. Let that knowledge rest in you tonight. Honor it. The world gave it to you the same way the ocean gave fish to the fish pond. Slowly, through an accumulation of tidal moments, each one small, each one necessary, adding up to a depth of understanding that only became visible after enough time had passed. The fish ponds held primarily milkfish, a species the Hawaiians called awa, and mullet called ama. Both species thrived in the warm, nutrient-rich waters of the ponds, where algae grew in abundance on the stone walls and the shallow, sun-warmed bottom, providing a nearly inexhaustible natural food source. The fish were not fed by human hands. They were provided for by the design of the system itself, which captured sunlight and turned it into algae, and turned algae into fish flesh, and turned fish flesh into the protein that fed communities across generations. On a morning harvest, the pond keepers would enter the water quietly, wading in from the shore, their movements slow and deliberate. They carried hand nets. They worked without urgency. The fish in a well-maintained locoia were not accustomed to danger. They could be approached and gathered with a patience that open water fishing rarely permitted. The harvest was intimate. You could see the fish you were taking. You could choose. Take the largest and most mature. Leave the younger ones to continue growing. Manage the population not merely to feed today, but to ensure abundance for the season ahead. The fish ponds were maintained by the Ahupua'a community collectively, under the supervision of the konohiki. The walls required constant inspection and repair. Storms could dislodge stones. Sea creatures could work into gaps and widen them. The makaha needed to be cleared of debris to maintain proper water flow. This maintenance was shared work, part of the communal obligation. Each family within the Ahupua'a owed to the system that sustained everyone. This was the malama aina, the ethic of caring for the land, not owning it, not exploiting it, caring for it. The Hawaiian relationship with the natural world was one of kinship, a deep sense that the land and sea were family, that the fish in the pond and the taro in the paddy and the ohia tree on the mountain were not resources to be extracted, but relatives to be honored and tended. Malama aina meant understanding yourself as part of the ecosystem rather than separate from it, as having responsibilities toward the living world rather than merely appetites in relation to it. You feel the water of the pond at the edge of your feet now. It is warm and clear, and you can see the sandy bottom through it, ribboned with the reflected light of the last sun on the water's surface. A mullet moves in the shadows near the stone wall, unhurried, perfectly at home. Its silver sides catch the light for a moment, and then it turns and disappears into the deeper water near the center of the pond, and you are left with only the rings of its passing spreading outward across the still surface. Watch those rings, the way they expand perfectly from the point of origin, each circle larger than the last, each one fading as it reaches its fullest extent. This is how everything moves in a life. Every action, every choice, every kindness, and every harm, rings expanding outward, growing larger, becoming invisible at their edges, but having moved the water, even so, even when you can no longer see them, the rings reach the stone wall, and everything is still again. Breathe deeply. You are standing at the edge of an ancient fish pond in the fading light, and the world is extraordinarily beautiful, and you are part of it, and you always have been. even after the specific particularity of you has dissolved back into the elements from which it was assembled. This is not a sad thought. Held in the right way, it is the most peaceful thought in the world. Beyond the fish pond, beyond the stone wall and its makaha grates, the ocean begins. And it does not begin gradually. In the Hawaiian Islands, the transition from shallow fish pond to open ocean is often sudden and dramatic. One moment you're in sheltered water, shallow and warm and still. The next moment, the reef drops away beneath you, and the Pacific opens up in every direction with a vastness that makes the human body feel both very small and very awake. The reef, the koa, the outermost boundary of the Ahupua'a. Here is where the system found its final edge. The Ahupua'a did not extend infinitely into the ocean, though the ocean certainly influenced everything the Ahupua'a contained. The reef marked the seaward boundary, the place beyond which the deep ocean began, and the defined territory of the land community gave way to the open commons of the sea. And the reef itself, everything from the shoreline to the outer coral edge, was as carefully managed as any other zone within the Ahupua'a. The Hawaiian Reef was not simply a place where fish happened to live. It was a garden, maintained over centuries by the careful application of kapu and community knowledge. Certain species were protected during spawning seasons. Certain areas were closed entirely during periods of stress, allowed to rest before fishing resumed. The Kapu system that organized the valley extended all the way down to the coral, ensuring the reef too was given regular periods of recovery. You can see the reef now from the shallows, its dark, complex shapes visible through the clear water. Coral formations built over thousands of years, their structures as intricate as cities. Sea turtles moving slowly over the outer edge, their great dark shapes unhurried. Schools of fish turning in unison, a synchronized motion that is half mathematics and half miracle. Each individual fish responding to the collective in fractions of a second too small for human perception, but adding up to something that looks, from the outside, like intention. Like one enormous organism, expressing a single continuous desire. The ocean has its own rhythm at this hour. The waves move against the reef with a sound that is both powerful and deeply soothing. A low, continuous percussion playing since long before any human being stood on these shores and continuing long after the last has left them. The sound of the ocean at night is the oldest sound you will ever hear. Older than speech, older than music. It precedes you. It will outlast you. And in its presence, the urgencies of the day-lit world become proportioned correctly. Small in the way that all human concerns are actually small when held against the immensity of water moving over stone in the dark. Close your eyes for a moment here. The sound alone is enough to tell you everything you need to know about permanence and patience and the inexhaustible generosity of a world that keeps offering itself to human attention without ever asking for anything in return, except that you pay attention, that you notice, that you be present to the gift. The fishermen of the Ahupua'a came to the reef at all hours, but the night fishing was special. Particular knowledge was required that daylight fishing did not demand. You had to know the phases of the moon and what each phase meant for the behavior of different species. You had to know which stars rose when and what their rising signaled about wind and current. You had to know the sound of the water, how the quality of the wave sound changed when a school of fish was moving through, how the surface looked different when something large was moving in the water below. This was not mysticism. It was observation refined over generations into knowledge so complete that it could not be separated from the person who held it. The same deep literacy in the natural world's language that allowed Hawaiian voyagers to cross 2,000 miles of open ocean without instruments and arrive precisely where they intended. The same attention, the same accumulated intimacy with the way things behave when you've been watching them long enough. A fisherman setting out at night onto the reef carried his knowledge the way you carry your own deepest knowledge, not in books, in his body, in the 1,000 small adjustments his hands made automatically in response to conditions he was reading faster than consciousness, in the way he balanced in the canoe without thinking about balance, in the way he cast without calculating the arc, in the way he knew from the feel of the line between his fingers whether the water below him was empty or alive. You've worked like that. You've moved through a domain so thoroughly learned that the learning became invisible, where the gap between intention and execution closed so completely that the action seemed effortless, where you stopped thinking about the work and simply did the work, and the work was better for it because it was being done from a place below thought, where your genuine understanding actually lives. Let your body remember that feeling now, the feeling of doing something exactly right, of being exactly in your element, of being as close as a human being ever gets to the experience of the fish in the reef, perfectly suited to your environment, perfectly shaped by experience for exactly the life you are living. Rest with that for a moment. You deserve it. The Hawaiian fishing canoe, the wa'a, was itself a form of accumulated genius, carved from a single koa tree, shaped through the work of master craftsmen who understood wood the way the fishermen understood water. The canoe was designed for Hawaiian coastal and deep water conditions in ways no outside designer could have produced without generations of testing. The outrigger, the ama, was the balance mechanism allowing the narrow hull to remain stable in ocean swells that would capsize a conventional hull. The connection between hull and outrigger, the iako, was flexible by design, allowing the boat to flex with the water rather than resist it, absorbing the ocean's movement rather than fighting it. The canoe was therefore a lesson in the same wisdom the entire Ahupua'a embodied. Work with the natural world. Understand its patterns. Let the water teach you how to move on water. Let the fish teach you how to find fish. Let the mountain teach you how to manage soil. The intelligence of the system lay not in imposing human will on the natural world, but in reading the world's own logic and aligning human life with it as carefully as possible. This is ancient wisdom. It is also urgently necessary wisdom for the world outside this room tonight. But you do not need to carry that weight right now. Tonight, that wisdom is simply a gift, an invitation, a way of being that you can rest in without any obligation to act on it or defend it. You can simply receive it, the way the taro roots receive water, the way the reef receives the moon's light, the way you are receiving this moment right now. The stars are fully out now above the reef. The sky over open ocean is darker and fuller of stars than the sky over the valley behind you. No hills to curtail the horizon. The full Hawaiian sky in its completeness, the Milky Way overhead, the navigation stars sitting exactly where generations of Hawaiian navigators knew they would sit, exactly as reliable as they had always been, exactly as beautiful. The star that the Hawaiians called Hokulea, the star of gladness, sits almost directly overhead. It is the star you know as Arcturus. For Hawaiian voyagers sailing southward from the islands, when Hokulea sat directly overhead, they knew they were at the latitude of the Hawaiian archipelago. When it began to descend towards the northern horizon, they had sailed south of home. When it sank below the horizon entirely, they were deep in Polynesia, in the ancestral territory from which the Hawaiian people had originally sailed north on the great voyages of settlement that populated these islands around the 4th century of the Common Era. You are lying in the light of that star right now, even through your ceiling and your roof and the ordinary obscuring materials of modern life. Hokulea is out there above you, exactly where it has always been, exactly as bright, exactly as navigable. The sky that guided canoes across thousands of miles of ocean is the sky above your home tonight. The stars that held the knowledge of an entire civilization's relationship to the Pacific are the same stars that have always been above every roof you've ever slept under. They have witnessed everything, your childhood, your youth, every night of your life, whether you looked up or not. They were there, patient, constant, organizing the darkness into meaning for anyone willing to learn their language. Think of what you have navigated in your life, the crossings you have made without instruments, the passages through dark water and uncertain conditions that required you to draw on knowledge you barely knew you possessed until the moment it was needed. The times you found your way home, when home seemed impossibly distant, guided by something, not quite reason and not quite instinct, but a combination of both operating below conscious thought. The Hawaiian navigator trusted the stars and the ocean the way you have had to trust yourself in the hardest crossings of your life. Not because certainty was available. Certainty was never available, but because the accumulated learning was sound, and the attention was genuine, and the deep knowledge held even when the conditions were difficult, even when the stars were hidden by cloud. Even then, the navigator kept going. Even then, the canoe arrived. You arrived too. Whatever crossings your life has required, you arrived. You are here, in this bed, under these covers, in this body that has carried you through everything you have ever needed to carry. You arrived the way the voyaging canoes arrived, guided by knowledge deeper than words, sustained by care built into you across a lifetime, held by a wisdom whose origins you cannot fully trace, but whose presence you have never denied. The night is deepening now around the reef. The ocean sounds are unchanging in their pattern, but infinite in their variation. No two waves exactly the same fundamental rhythm expressed in an endless succession of unique individual moments. This is the sound that quiets the mind the most completely. Not because it is monotonous, but because it is both predictable and endlessly new simultaneously. And this combination, this particular quality of reliable variation, is the sound the human nervous system was listening to for 10,000 years before the world became the world it has become. It is the sound we return to when we need to remember how to rest. Let it work on you now. Let the ocean's sound that is available to you, even here, even in memory, even in the deep imagining that good storytelling makes possible, let it work on what is still tense in you, in your shoulders, in your jaw, in the place behind your eyes where the day's accumulated weight tends to gather and refuse to dissolve even when the day is over and the reasons for tension are temporarily absent. Let the reef teach your nervous system the thing it is always trying to teach, that the wave comes and the wave passes, that the ocean beneath the waves is undisturbed, that beneath every surface disturbance, no matter how large, there is depth, and in the depth there is stillness, and in the stillness there is everything you have ever needed. Breathe into that depth now. Not the surface breath, the deep breath, the one that reaches into the lower part of your lungs, that expands your belly before your chest. The breath the Hawaiian people understood as the breath of mana, of life force, of the divine presence moving through all living things. Breathe it in, let it settle, and on the exhale, release something, anything, whatever has been waiting for permission to go. It's time to walk back now. Up from the reef, up from the fish pond, back through the lower coastal flat where the coconut palms stand against a fully dark sky, up through the breadfruit groves and sweet potato gardens, up through the Kapa Making households where the mallets are quiet and the beaten cloth lies drying, waiting for morning and decoration and the continuation of its slow transformation from bark to garment to heirloom, up through the Loi Kalo where the taro paddies hold their shallow moonlit water, the plants standing still in the night air, their broad leaves reflecting starlight, their roots working in the dark, doing the patient invisible work that roots always do regardless of whether anyone is watching. Up through the middle slopes where the craftspeople sleep and the Konahiki's household is quiet and the stone paths between house platforms are empty, held by the deep silence that productive communities settle into when the day's work is complete and the obligation of the night is simply rest. Up past the edges of the cultivated zone into the wilder middle forest. Up where the ohia trees grow thicker and the tree ferns multiply and the air grows cooler and begins to taste of cloud again. Up toward the Wao Akua, the sacred forest at the top of everything, the place where the water begins its long, patient journey down through every zone you have traveled tonight, arriving at last at the reef as the same water that began as mist in the highest uplands. You are that journey. You contain the entire Ahupua'a within yourself. The high, cold clarity of the uplands, the deep, fertile patience of the Taro Valley, the creative industry, of the Kapa Making households. The ancient sacred law of the Kapu holding the whole system in its proper relationship. The warm, protected abundance of the fish pond. The vast, humbling, sustaining immensity of the reef and the open ocean beyond. All of these are you. All of these have been you at different moments of your life. All of these are available to you tonight, in this bed, in this body, in this long, unrepeatable life you have lived. The Hawaiian people had a phrase, e ola. It means live. It was a greeting and a blessing and a prayer simultaneously. E ola, may you live. May life flow through you. May the mana that moves through all living things find you open and worthy of its passage. It was said between people on the road, at the beginning of shared meals, over the newly born and over the newly dead, at the two great thresholds where the sacred becomes most visible. E ola, you are living. Right now, in this moment, under these covers, breathing this particular breath, you are alive the way the taro is alive in the loi, the way the mullet is alive in the fish pond, the way the ohia tree is alive in the Wao Akua. Completely, with all of your particular nature expressed in the specific conditions of your specific existence. There has never been anyone exactly like you. There will never be anyone exactly like you again. The Ahupua'a of your particular life encompasses zones no one else has ever mapped, and resources no one else has ever managed, and a reef no one else has ever fished. And tonight, that particular, unrepeatable self is being held in a bed, covered with warmth, invited to rest. Tonight, your only responsibility is to breathe, to rest, to allow the accumulated wisdom of your long life to settle into you the way taro roots settle into the rich mud of the flooded paddy, the way the fish settle into the deep center of the warm pond, the way the mist settles back into the upland forest at the end of the day, completing the cycle, making everything ready for morning. The fish pond holds its fish in safe warm darkness. The reef breathes in its slow ancient way, the coral building its millimeter by millimeter architecture. The canoes rest on the beach above the tide line, their beautiful shapes waiting for morning, and the fishermen who will carry them back to the water, trusting them again with their lives and the intimate wordless knowledge that a lifetime of ocean fishing produces. And above all of it, the stars, Hokulea burning steady and bright almost directly overhead. The star of gladness, the navigator's star, the reliable point of light that tells you where you are and which way home is from wherever you find yourself in the dark ocean of the night. You know where you are tonight. You are home, in the only body you will ever have, in the only life you will ever live, in the bed that holds your particular weight, the mattress shaped over time by the repeated impression of your specific body in its preferred positions. You are not adrift. You are exactly where you are supposed to be, at the precise latitude your life has brought you to, under the stars that have been watching over you every night of your existence, whether you looked up or not. E ola, live, rest, be sustained by the systems of care that are organized around you. the way everything in the Ahupua'a was organized around every living member of its community. You don't have to manage anything tonight. The makaha will do their work without your supervision. The loi channels will carry their water without your direction. The kapa will dry without your attention. The kapu will hold the sacred order of things in its place, as it always has, as it always will, whether any individual human being is awake to observe it or not. The sacred order of things is not your responsibility tonight. Tonight, your only responsibility is to breathe, to rest, to allow the accumulated wisdom of your long and richly lived life to settle into you the way taro roots settle into the rich mud of the flooded paddy, the way the fish settle into the deep center of the warm, protected pond, the way the mist settles back into the upland forest at the end of the day, returning to the place it came from, completing the cycle, making everything ready for morning. The fires die down, the stories settle, and the world grows still. Let your thoughts drift away like embers on the wind. The valley behind you grows quiet. The reef below you sighs in its ancient, unhurried way. The Ahupua'a holds everything it has ever held, patient and complete, from the mountain summit to the coral edge, from the sacred upland forest to the open ocean, from the first footfall of the earliest Hawaiian settler to the last echo of the civilization that grew from that footfall across 1400 years of extraordinary, intelligent, deeply human life on these islands. You were part of it tonight. You walked those paths. You heard those sounds. You understood, in the way that the body understands things that the mind is too busy to receive during the daylight hours, what it means to live within a system rather than above it, what it means to give back to what sustains you, what it means to observe the sacred limits that make abundance possible, what it means to beat your cloth with patience, and your fish with care, and your soil with love, and your community with the steady, daily, unspectacular faithfulness that is the deepest form of devotion any human being can offer to the world that made them. You've journeyed far through time tonight. Now it's time to journey into dreams. Close your eyes, breathe, and let sleep find you. The Ahupua'a is complete. The mountain stands, the water flows. The kapa is finished and beautiful and decorated with the patterns of your particular life. The patterns no one else could have made. The patterns that are yours and yours alone. The fish pond holds its abundance in patient, warm, well-ordered darkness. The reef breathes. The stars hold their positions. Hokulea burns steady overhead, the star of gladness, marking your latitude, pointing you toward home. You are already home. You have always been home. Rest now in the quiet valley of everything you've learned and everything you've loved and everything you've carried with the quiet faithfulness of a person who understood that the land and the sea and the people who depend on both deserve nothing less than your full, honest, generous care. Rest in that understanding. Let it hold you the way the Ahupua'a held everyone who ever lived within its careful, ancient, sufficient embrace.